Now, on the issue of where you're joining us from today, you sent lots of lovely pictures from Northern Ireland, some of them slightly beyond Northern Ireland, but how about this for a location? We're going to cross to the south coast of Tenerife and speak to someone who has been hosting sessions as part of the DARE project, and she's on the line now. Melinda DeMott, a very, very good morning to you. Before we do anything else, just show us where you are. Show us your view this morning, because to use common parlance, it's a humdinger. Let's see it.
Okay, good morning, good afternoon, everybody. This is where I am on the island of Tenerife.
How about that?
And this is my view, and this is my way of waking up and looking at beauty.
Well, you sure trumped the Donegal daffodils with that view anyway. It's very good to speak to you. You are director, co-founder of the Norwegian Institute for Expressive Art Therapy, and your whole area of interest is around self-care, and it goes back to what we said earlier. How are you supposed to care for others when you're not looking after yourself? So I'm going to throw over to you to explain why it's important, how we do it for the next 45 minutes or so. But if I could lead you off, I suppose the issue of self-care maybe has never been as prescient as it has been in the last 12 months where we've all been dealing with the pandemic.
Well, I think it's a time where self-care has never been called for so much, but it's not only self-care, it's we care. It's how in this time it's especially important to build bridges the whole time, because the topic for today is, techniques in self-care. Why is it so important to care for ourselves, and how do we do it? And today, the pandemic is called the invisible war, and we're living in a collective trauma. And my background is in mental health. I've been working in mental health since 1973. I've worked in many different countries, and I majorly worked for the last 30 years with traumatized refugees and people who have survived nature-induced trauma. And usually when you have asylum seekers, they are in an in-between space. So we have all been thrown into an in-between space. But I would like to start off with, after seeing all these beautiful nature images, just taking a deep breath, because what we do when we're in this unpredictable time, not being aware of it, we hold our breath a lot. So just before I start with my slides and, just sense the image you've been looking at or the picture you took, and take a deep breath, and even stretch from your chair and just feel that you can breathe out. It's sort of like when you're a little bit stressed, you get your shoulders up and you breathe in, and then you go, oh, it's over. So just sense that you can let the chair, whatever you're sitting on, hold you, and just sense your breathing through these 40 minutes that I'm going to be talking, and sense when you breathe out and you're just being calm, and when does something I say maybe trigger you or make you aware, and then be sure to take another breath and then let go. So I'm going to be now talking and showing slides. It's always good when I'm showing slides, because I feel it gives you something to focus on, and it helps me to keep the red thread. I'm now on the island of Tenerife because I'm in lockdown. It's a beautiful place to be. So I've been doing a lot of self-care because the weather makes it possible for me to be outdoors. And self-care can be hobbies like playing tennis, walking on the beach, but self-care can also be the way you get up in the morning, the way you drink your coffee. And many of us think about the way we do things during the day. We're not really aware of what we do. And So I'm inviting you through this lecture to become aware of your daily rituals. And many of you call it routines, but let's say if we lift it and make it to daily rituals, that you make it something special. It could be that you, for example, light a candle when you're eating your breakfast. That makes it to something different. Going back to our title for today, Techniques in Self-Care. Why is it so important to care for ourselves, and how do we do it? Okay, so Expressive Arts. As I was introduced, I'm the leader and the co-founder of the Norwegian Institute for Expressive Arts. And, and the way I define culture is the way we communicate with each other in a given context. And so we don't only communicate with our words, but we communicate with the way we dress, the music we listen to, what we eat during the day, and how do we decorate our rooms, and with what? And what in the theory of expressive arts, what we try to do is to enhance our spontaneity every day and expand our range of play. Playing meaning the way you are in the world, so that instead of just sitting in your room and being very uptight and feeling that while you're in lockdown that you can't do anything, you can actually expand your body, take deep breaths, and look around the way Carol invited us to look around for what gives you energy and what calms you down. So you have a choice. And we call this expanding your range of play. Play with your room. Play with what you're looking at, what you're hearing, what you're seeing, what you're eating. So today, the time we're living in is defined as a collective trauma, something that is unpredictable, and it is an invisible war. We don't know who it's going to strike, who it's going to hit, when, and where. So this calls for self-care because it's a very unpredictable situation, and it can trigger earlier traumas. And I know in Northern Ireland, there are many earlier traumas that can throw people into fear and withdrawal and being on guard and distress and stress. So holding one's breath. And the former speaker was talking about living in a culture of fear. And fear disconnects. It disconnects communities. It fragments communities. And instead of reaching out to each other and connecting and engaging, it easily fear, because you want to protect yourself, it disengages and you withdraw and become isolated. And therefore, it's also a very call for we care, that we look out for each other. So this is really an image of, when you look at this, well, where is everybody? But this is the invisible war. They're predicting that all these beds are going to be full in any given moment, and they're prepared. This lady, when I feel her in my body and reverse roles with her, I feel the isolation, the disconnection, the feeling of being ill, that keep away from me. And I've been working a lot with this theme, self-care, with health workers that are in the first line, and where they've gotten the pandemic, they've gotten COVID-19, been sent home, and where suddenly they feel nobody cares, nobody calls, nobody reaches out and says, how are you doing? We're thinking about you, lighting a candle for you. So be aware that we don't make people into objects, that we know that each individual is thrown into a role and is unique, and to be sure to reach out to each other. This is also another woman being isolated, not being able to reach out. So we're thrown into a liminal space. This term comes from Victor Turner. He's a social anthropologist, and he was studying this liminal space for many, many years in many different cultures. And the liminality is living in between, that you're in between something, that you're neither here or there. And that's what we're finding ourselves in now. We're in a pandemic where our old culture is gone, the things we normally do, and we don't know what the new will be. So who will I become? Will I have new friends, new family? I'm living on Tenerife. I definitely have a new way of working. I have many new friends down here. So can my everyday routines perform as rituals to prevent the damage of living in the in-between, being neither here or there? We are living in this collective trauma, the COVID-19, and all the mutations that are now heading towards a number with 3. We do not know what the new normal will be. So it's calling for us to create predictable rituals in our everyday life as medicine to prevent the damage of living in unpredictable time and liminality. Now, Victor Turner worked very closely with Van Gennep, and rituals have the performance to prevent the damage. And we all know what rituals normally are, is helping us from being single to being married. We have a wedding. When we lose somebody, at least before the pandemic, we went to a funeral, we said goodbye. So, but also we have everyday rituals that help us get through the day, the way we get up in the morning, the way we come home from work, the way we go to bed. All these routines need in the pandemic to become rituals that you're conscious of how you do. The most important for self-care is sleeping, breathing, and moving. Now, it sounds very easy, but if you think on a scale on 1 to 6, if here is 1, your breath is, you're only barely breathing to breathing all the way down in your belly, that's 6. How deep is your breathing? How many hours do you sleep per night? When do you go to bed? What do you do before you go to bed? Do you listen to the news? Do you listen to bad news? Do you read? What do you read? And is it calming or is it getting you all aroused? So, and also how much are you walking and moving? Or are you just sitting in front of your machine and moving into the kitchen and moving into a room? So just take a moment and think about your daily rituals. And if you have something to write with, just think about how you get up in the morning, you know, what's important for you to do. And it can be a small thing. It can be a cup of coffee and look out the window at something nice. But think about what daily rituals calm you down and what you can look at in your room that gives you energy. And the same, think about music that calms you down. Music you can choose to listen to, and also music that calms you down. Music you can share with others. And I'm going to take you to enhancing the community resilience is also about what you do together. And we've been talking about the school and the young people. And what we're doing in Norway is that we're inducing self-care, stress management classes in the 12th, when people are around in the 6th grade, so that the youth can learn how to self-regulate, can learn how they can use music to take care of themselves, how they can use the arts to help them to visualize good images, images that give them hope for the future. They can look for the future with no COVID. So how can we bring this knowledge into the schools? And so we have, in many different countries, there's now emerging, because of the pandemic, self-care classes, and already down in the 6th grade. And kids love to engage with each other and share their way of playing with each other. And so the collective trauma is calling for us to care about each other as much as we care about ourselves. But we have embodied cultures. What I like doing as self-care, it can be going alone for a walk in the woods, which can be for somebody else a punishment to walk alone in the woods. So we all have to find our way of making choices, that daily choices that bring us into optimism, that we can become optimistic in our everyday life, to become positive. And it's so easy in this time when we forget our everyday rituals. It's like my husband, he's been in his bathrobe all day, you know, doesn't have to get dressed. And other people don't have to go to work, but they have their kids home because there's homeschool. So this is changing our way of our rhythms. So you have to create a new daily rhythm that works and that prevents you to get triggered and into too much stress and fear. So intermodal expressive arts, all art expressions are intermodals. We move between image, it can be visual, but in the image we can hear sound, there can be movement, there could be drama in it, and there can be the ground for a film. So it's important that we use all our senses and that they're flexible in this time and don't get locked to negative images and the information of bad news. During the pandemic in Norway, people came outdoors at 7 o'clock every evening, and here you see outside an old home, a musician came and played music. And there was a lot of creativity in the common space, bringing people together. That was we care. And the time is calling for this to continue, to have spaces in the community where we can come together and get out of isolation. The withdrawal and the isolation that has been happening slowly has also done that many people feel more tired and disengaged. Oh, I thought I was going to write a book during the pandemic. I was so excited. Now I've lost my interest. Now, this all has to do with that. We have no way of really pointing out what's going on. And we're happy when we're not ill, but there's another type of emotional fatigue moving in. And even in the Norwegian newspapers today, they said we're going to have a new mental pandemic because people are getting mentally disturbed of the pandemic. So we've gone through this slide, but we can always afford to repeat that we are in a liminal phase, that the purpose of ritual is to reduce the damage that can occur during the liminal phase, creating a playing room in the waiting room. So instead of feeling that you're waiting for the vaccine or waiting for COVID-19 to go over or waiting for the mutations to end, create a life every day, that you're creating a predictability in your life by creating your own good rituals, your morning rituals, your afternoon rituals, and your evening rituals. So creating everyday rituals as self-care. So enhancing community resilience is also creating community rituals. And maybe, as we heard the former speaker talk about, we have to create new rituals. We have to be creative in this time. For a year ago, I didn't know how to use Zoom, and now I'm on Zoom 5 days a week, dancing with people, making art, singing. I never thought we could ever do expressive arts on Zoom. So it's been a time calling for spontaneity, how to make something new out of something old, and how to have a new reaction to an old situation, and that it's adequate, that it has the purpose of connecting and engaging and enhancing well-being. Now, life is always moving between these two columns. When I took my doctorate in 2007, I was studying Bosnian war refugees for 14 years about how does trauma live in the body, the embodied trauma, and how do the PTS stress symptoms as sleeplessness, agitation, lack of concentration, withdrawal, how do these symptoms move? And we found out that it's normal. It's a normal thing to move between numbness and sensibility and captivity and freedom, this feeling of being in captivity in your body, to being able to breathe, and sense your breathing. And who am I now? And then feeling, here I am. So these two columns, when the one should get concerned is when you're feeling that the numbness, the captivity, the feeling of dependency, being an object, not feeling home, feeling betrayed, being an outsider. If these feelings, these dark feelings become static, they don't move. You're not moving in between. I can move in between these columns during a day, but when it gets frozen, that's when you have to get concerned. And this is where it can help you to move, to feel that just by moving, you're changing your perception. Just by looking at new things gives you a new perception. So to be conscious, to take a choice, to look and move, and what you do to get more rested is very important, so that you keep moving between the two columns. Now, one thing that we're going to be facing, which really is calling for we-care and self-care, is how do you do closure when you lose somebody? When you cannot go to the funeral because it's only allowed to be 20 people, or that you cannot travel because it's not permitted to travel. My sister-in-law's sister died yesterday, and I'm on Tenerife, and I cannot participate. But even if I was in Norway, I couldn't participate because you're not allowed to travel. And there's a limited amount of people in the funerals. And this is called ambiguous loss. Losses that have not been closed. And it can be physical, it can be death of loved ones, it can be that somebody is having a life-threatening disease and dies, and you haven't been able to have a closure and say goodbye. It can be a sudden accident or disasters. But there's also something we forget about too, is psychological loss, that the whole dynamics of your family changes when somebody dies. It's not the way it was before, the loss of the way it was. Working with refugees, most of them have lost their families. But I've also been working with 215 unaccompanied minor refugee boys In a large study over a period of 3 years, 50% did not get asylum and disappeared. And there was no way for me to say goodbye to them, give them a hug, and there was nobody looking for them. So I have to create my own rituals to say goodbye and be sure I close off, or else I will get emotional fatigue that moves maybe into secondary traumatization, that I feel nobody cares about me, that I feel that I'm disconnected and that I have no right to exist. So it's very important that when we don't have closures, to make closures. And this we can also do by making small rituals, lighting a candle, writing a letter, journaling, writing a letter to somebody about somebody that you've lost, to help give it shape and form and taking a real decision on saying goodbye. My mother got senile. I was missing my mom. The mom she turned into was not my mom. And I really had to say goodbye to the mom I had to be able to take care of the new mom, the new one that needed me just as much, but that I really didn't know. And she didn't really know me. So these ambiguous losses we have to be aware of. And there can be mental illnesses that people become mentally ill, become alcoholics, drug abusers, and also miscarriages that today when women lose babies, there's very seldom that there's any offer to have a funeral or say goodbye. And you can feel it in your embodied loss. So spontaneity training is doing something new in a new way, doing something old in a new way, or creating something new out of something old. So look around in your room, and maybe when you look at it now, you can look for something that gives you energy, and then you can turn your head and look for something that calms you down. I have a little picture here that I look at when I want to be calmed down, and it's of a lighthouse. And that makes me breathe, and I feel there's light and there's hope in the future. And then I have this wonderful stone that looks like the ocean, and it gives me energy. So small things, before they were just a picture and a stone, and then after I began to do these self-care groups, they got a whole new meaning. So it's like looking at a cartoon. You can animate your world. You can even look at the door and say, ask the door, what is your message to me today? Or ask the flower you found, what is the message to me today? To go into dialogue with your room and see how you want to redecorate it so that it gives you calmness, but also that it inspires you. So you can create your room in this time of having to go often into quarantine or lockdown. So be sure to welcome each other and welcome yourself every day, and that you have everyday activities. It can be something so simple as taking a small walk for 10 minutes, 10 minutes of yoga, 10 minutes of painting, but something that you feel that you can practice that gives you a sense of predictability in this unpredictable time. And find your calming landscape, a landscape where you can close your eyes and go to a place that helps you breathe, that helps you feel a sense of belonging and a sense of also that this is a place where I can rest. And then to have future projections and scenarios of positive images for the future and for you and your community. And I put power animal down here because in Norway, we have one of our most known skiers. She was almost winning all the time, but never really got enough energy to win. And she went into sports psychology, and she found her power animal, and it was a tiger that helped her to give everything when it really counted. So we often say, what animal has qualities that you need right now? I have, for example, a black stallion that helps me to run on the beach and feel free and to jump over difficulties that are not difficulties, to enjoy the challenges instead of letting them stop me and playing with them. So yes, ambiguous loss. Be sure to have closure to losses, both physical and mentally losses, and be sure that self-care and we care has a purpose of creating contact, engagement, safety, mastering, that you're in control in your own context, and that it gives hope. So exit groups that focus on this is exit. We've made a manual with the arts. It's a 10-session exit group leader training that we have going in Malta and Norway and Germany, and maybe even in Northern Ireland in the future, that these exit groups can be perfect for youth to have in school, to learn about stress mastering and also self-care and we care. And that would prepare them for the future. And it also would be palliative for mental health, that they would be in the salutogenesis perspective of life, focusing on what's healthy, what gives me health, and to not go to pathology and focus on illness. We have to focus on health so that we take control over making healthy communities.
Melinda, thank you for that. There's lots that I'd like to talk to you about based on what you've said. Can we go right back to the beginning, if you don't mind, first? And you said a lot of the work that you have done was in the aftermath of trauma caused by the natural world. And very often the trauma that has come up in the dialogue that we're concerned with has been trauma caused by fellow woman and man. Do you see a difference in how they affect people or how they play out?
Well, today the discourse is that it's not that easy to separate. So nature-induced trauma is usually caused by fellow man. And it's often, if you go to Nicaragua, where I've worked for UNICEF, Mitch, which was a nature-induced trauma, it affected the poor because all the trees were cut down that were supposed to protect them from landslides. You had also the tsunami, where the tourists were not warned, where the government was hoping that the tsunami would just not come, even though they knew there had been an earthquake. So they're very often tied together. But I'll tell you, from working 15 years with torture survivors, the difference is that the being done to, and it often, and also working with Bosnian war survivors, it's often your friend who tortures you in war. It's somebody you know. It's somebody who is, and everybody thinks about the enemy as being way far away, but often the enemy is somebody you know. And that does that that you live in a black hole because you don't trust anybody. And the purpose of war and torture is that you're never going to trust anybody again, so that you live in isolation and loneliness and will never have any influence on your community, and that you will live in fear the rest of your life without having a voice and without having any influence. And that, I will say, is why we work so much with finding your voice, standing up for yourself. I've made 3 documentary films with refugees so that they find their voice and that they can tell the communities where they live, but also the countries where they moved, what they've been through, so that they have a voice and that they are not put to silence. So breaking the silence is really important when you've gone through. And testimony, sharing not only with words, but art. Through art, many people don't have words when they've been traumatized. Luckily, they haven't had that language, but working with other expressions, it can be through music, it can be through low skill, just through nature, creating things in nature, or doing like Carol Kane's been working with materials, making crazy quilts and putting colors together, creating a mosaic with the community, putting things together again and creating new images of the past. So yes, there is a big difference in terms of how people, because of war, are scared of other people.
We can't escape the context in which we're talking today in a pandemic. It strikes me, and correct me if I'm wrong, there will be lots of people who know that they have been profoundly affected by the last 12 months. But there may be many other people who have found the pressure building incrementally. And they've spent the last 12 months saying, oh, I'm fine. Actually, I might have been furloughed. I'm at home, or I'm still going into work. And actually, all things considered, I'm okay. And yet in the background, there is a base level of tension that has been building up so incrementally that you might not even be aware of it. What are your reflections on that? And as we listen to you, we'll probably be checking ourselves. So to see if we have been suffering from this incremental buildup of tension and pressure, how would we know it?
Well, I think what I said in my talk is that to be aware of your engagement, and if you're tired, and taking initiative, just taking initiative to reach out and call someone or to go for a walk. That depression can be sneaking in there. And depression often is connected with anxiety and fear, and then again, fatigue.
So should we work on the assumption that we are all suffering from the effects of the pandemic, even though we might necessarily feel it in ourselves?
Well, I would definitely say that you have to check up on your everyday rituals. Now, if you, for example, we have something called watchful waiting in Norway, and that is to check up on families that have been through accidents or stressful situations. If they get back to normality, that they get back to singing in their choir, playing tennis, swimming, meeting the guys. But if they don't get back into that common space of connecting again, then you have to there's a red light going. But you don't wait for red light. Be aware of your community and your neighbors and to reach out and see how they're doing. I can see in my community that we're trying to share with each other, but it's really hard for people to know. But if you can point it out, how do you get up? You know, it's like I shared, my husband walks around in his bathrobe all day long. So I have to say, okay, let's go and play tennis. So we're playing tennis now every day to make a break, to do something different. And I think this is how you can point it out is to check yourself every day and to be sure that you're making predictable rhythms during the day in this unpredictable time so that you feel a sense of control. It's very important.
You said that we should be aware that we don't make people into objects. Now, part of me suspects we do that because we'll get fatigued or overwhelmed by the sense that we have to emotionally engage or feel compassion for everyone we might encounter. Just expand on that a little bit and this notion of compassion fatigue.
Well, if you're working in the front line, for example, in a hospital, it will be bed number 1, 2, 3, patient number 4. in an asylum center. It's asylum seeker number 2061. They don't have names. So this feeling of that I'm just an object, I don't have an identity, I don't have a name. It's not that you have to engage with me or be, talking, but it's just to really have respect that each individual would like to be said, good morning, Melinda, good morning, Richard, and not the number on your screen. Good morning, 7577, and that just gives a different feeling in the body. And we have an embodied culture of what it means to be received and what it means to be rejected or made into something that we can dispose of.
But does that come with a risk? I'm mindful of firefighters who, in my experience as a journalist interviewing them, have come in recent years to use a horrible expression when talking about a victim who's died in a fire, and they say the individual became life extinct at whatever the time is. Now that is, I've always imagined, a specific phrase that has been chosen to almost dehumanize the victim, because that's protecting the firefighters and the authorities from those human emotions of compassion and contact. You may disagree with my analysis, but that's how I've always thought about it. And there is something surely in that notion of having to care and be on for everyone that we encounter. It becomes fatiguing in itself.
Yeah, but I think distancing yourself is healthy. It's how you distance yourself. And emotional fatigue is really somebody who doesn't know how to go home again, that you bring your clients home with you, that you don't have a bridge. So, if a nurse goes home, she takes off her white uniform and she makes a transition, and healthy nurse leaves the patients in the hospital and goes home and doesn't bring them home with her. Now, I was talking the other day about, this is the same with if you're a nurse or if you're working in an asylum center. There's something about being professional that you help people to become independent. You're not taking over. And sometimes, it depends if you're a firefighter. I'm sure firefighters, they talk different between themselves. Maybe you're there and you're hearing how they're distancing themselves to be able to not get emotional fatigue. But I'm sure that firefighters that come to me in therapy, many of them have to have some working through, because some of them have seen things that they can't deny, and some have heard things that they cannot deny. And it's the same with people that the PTSD symptoms came from Vietnam War veterans. So the post-traumatic stress syndrome, it came in 1981 because of Vietnam veterans that didn't get Social Security. And they were supposed to be professional and distance themselves, but they couldn't. The images kept on following them. So instead of thinking you can deny what you've been through, you have to be aware that helpers are not machines. They have feelings, and that many professions need to have supervision and have care for the helpers.
Over the last 3 years, the over 2,500 people who've taken part in this project have been challenged. They've been dared to lead change. And it seems that in the case of the nurse or the firefighter or those who work in established centres, they do have the benefit, as you've outlined, of going home and removing the uniform and maybe debriefing with their colleagues. It's not as easy, is it, for those who are daring to lead change in their own communities, who don't necessarily have that switch off where they get in and close the door behind them at 6 o'clock. The change that they're trying to lead is all around them. What complexities does that bring?
Well, that's where it goes back to this was self-care, because then it's hard to know you know, this thing of how do I distance myself when I'm living in the middle? I'm so enmeshed. We talked about cultures. Now, it's very hard to really see your culture of self-care when you're living in a culture. You have to go outside to see it. Like I said, if in Norway, where I live, if you go for walks in the woods, you think it's normal because everybody goes and walks in the woods alone and that's their self-care. But if you have many people from other countries, thinks that's crazy. Many things that some people do, but you have to know about how do we do things in our community? What is bringing health and what is destructive? And I think that's why it's so hard for mental health workers and community health workers, is that we need to work together to be able to see it from all perspectives. And I think many work too much alone.
Let's talk about another word you used then, which was spontaneity. That is something that those who are spontaneous find very easy and enjoyable and get a real kick out of it. But if you are not a spontaneous person, it's a nightmare that actually you get your comfort and sense of relief from structure and plans. Now, I am a spontaneous person. My other half is definitely not a spontaneous person, so you can imagine the clashes that brings at home, and that's a microcosm of it. You know, telling someone to be spontaneous, is that like telling someone to lighten up? It's useless unless they can do it and doesn't exactly show them how.
Well, try to show that you can turn your head and look at something that brings you energy. You can look at something that calms you down. It's a choice, you know. Spontaneity is a definition, comes from psychodrama. It's a group psychotherapy, and Moreno defines it as a practice of learning how to make something new out of something old. So structure is there. The old is a structure. So you have to have structure. I'm a very structured person myself. But within the structure, there's enough, then when you create predictability, what I was talking about, these rituals during the day, that could be a structure for your day, that there's something predictable. Then it brings safety about, and safety calls then for that you can play with things. So yeah, I think it's the opposite. I think that many people don't have to be action-oriented to be spontaneous. It can also be a mind. You're creative in your mind.
Well, it's more than that, though, isn't it?
All over the place.
It's more than that. Surely people have to find a joy in spontaneity. And I'm just wondering, for those who are listening to you and might aspire towards it, but actually find being spontaneous really uncomfortable, what's your advice to them? How do you bridge that gap, make them feel more comfortable? They might even get a kick out of it.
I think we're back into defining the word culture. I think my way of defining spontaneity is more, how do you make your bread during the day, or how do you make your bed, or how do you write your letter? It's how you do it, and it's with a sense of being connected and being engaged from what you do. So the spontaneity I'm talking about is the energy that helps you to connect, to be engaged, and to not isolate yourself.
If you're listening to this and you want to throw a quick question to Melinda, by all means do. It's the Ask the Question tab beneath the screen. My final question to you, Melinda, is what do you do with anger?
Play tennis.
Move to Tenerife and play tennis. Is that it? Is it purely in the realms of moving, getting physical with it all?
You can sing. I think singing is very important to release the tension. Anything that can release tension. It can be yoga. It can be dancing, going dancing. It can be different folks need different strokes, but I definitely believe that during this time, if you feel bottled up, if you feel you're tense, and to find some sort of release and something you can do. And a lot of people, the most normal thing in Norway is walking. So a lot of people go for long walks and walk it off, and other people have talks.
Melinda, it's been a real pleasure talking to you. I know we're going to connect again tomorrow to expand on some of these themes, and you know, our focus has been today and will certainly be again tomorrow, giving kind of practical advice, really helping people take all this home. But our very best to you in Tenerife. Thank you very much for that.
Thank you.